All right, let's jump right in. We are cracking open the National Electrical Code to talk about a section that is so important, but man, it can cause a lot of confusion. NEC 220.51. This is all about how you calculate the load for fixed electric space heating. If you get this right, your project is safe, it's efficient, but if you get it wrong, well, that's when you run into some serious problems. So, before we get buried in the details, let's just start with the biggest, most fundamental question you gotta ask on any job that involves electric heat. What is the number one, the absolute starting point, the non-negotiable rule for making this calculation?
And there it is, 100%. That's it. That's the magic number. The NEC says you must calculate your fixed electric space heating load at 100% of the total connected load. But what does that actually mean in the real world? Let's break it down.
Okay, so this brings us to the big idea here, the 100% heating rule. What the code is telling us essentially is to plan for the absolute worst-case scenario. You have to assume every single heating unit could be cranked to the max all at the same time. It's all about building in a big safety margin and making sure the system can handle it. Now, just so we're all on the same page, what exactly are we talking about when we say fixed electric space heating? We're talking about equipment that's hardwired in, stuff that's permanently installed. Things like baseboard heaters, in-wall fan heaters, that kind of thing. We are definitely not talking about that little portable heater you plug in under your desk. That's a totally different animal. So the total connected load is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You find every single one of those fixed heating units, you look at their nameplate rating, and you add them all up. It's kind of like designing a bridge, right? You don't design it for the average number of cars. You design it to hold every single lane packed bumper to bumper with the heaviest trucks imaginable. That's what the 100% rule does for your electrical system. And here's a really crucial safety detail that goes along with that. The feeder, that's the main line supplying power to all these heaters. It has to be rated for the total load, but it also can't be smaller than the largest single-branch circuit it's feeding. Think about it. If you have one really big heater on its own circuit, the main feeder has to be tough enough to handle that one unit all by itself, no matter what else is going on. It's another layer of safety. Okay, so theory's great, but what does this actually look like when you're on the job? Let's just walk through a really simple calculation to see this 100% rule in action. I promise, it's way more straightforward than it sounds. It really is just a simple three-step dance. Step 1, you list out every single fixed heating unit in the space. Step 2, you find the rating on each of them and add all those numbers together. And boom, step 3, that grand total is your minimum calculated load. So if you have, say, 3 heaters and they're all 1,500 watts each, your total is 4,500 watts. That's your number. Easy, right? Well, it's not always the full story. And this is where things get really interesting. See, the folks who write the code, they're smart. They knew that planning for that 100% worst-case scenario isn't always realistic. So they built in an exception. It's a way to use a more sensible calculation that can save you money on materials if, and trust me, it's a very big if, you meet the right criteria. So let's put these two approaches side by side because it makes the difference crystal clear. The standard rule on the left is simple and safe. Assume everything is on at once, period. But the exception, over on the right, it uses a little more logic. It recognizes that in some systems, it might be physically impossible for all the heaters to run at the same time. And if that's the case, it lets you size your conductors based on a smaller, more realistic load. So, what are these special conditions? Well, the code says you can use this exception when you can prove your heating units won't all be running at the same time. Maybe they're on a duty cycle or they're controlled by thermostats that prevent them from running together. The key idea here is that the system itself has some kind of control, maybe an interlock system, that physically prevents a full 100% load from ever happening. Now, please listen closely because this is the most important part of this whole discussion. You cannot, I repeat, cannot just decide on your own to use this exception. It is not a loophole you can just use whenever you want. It's a formal process that requires getting official permission. You cannot skip this step. And who do you get this permission from? You get it from the authority having jurisdiction, or, as you'll always hear it, the AHJ. That sounds like a big, scary government agency, right? But 99% of the time, the AHJ is just your local electrical inspector. They're the one who has the final say on whether your plan is safe and up to code. And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. Here's the language straight from the code book itself. I want you to pay close attention to the wording here. The AHJ shall be permitted to grant permission. It doesn't say they have to grant it says they can. It gives them the power to say yes, but only if you've made a solid, fact-based case that your smaller calculation is just as safe. So let's just hammer this point home one last time. Using the exception is not an automatic right. You have to do your homework. You have to show up with your calculations, your system diagrams, maybe even data from the manufacturer, and prove to that inspector that there's no way all those heaters can run at once. You have to convince them your plan is safe. And that really brings us to the final takeaway. When you're looking at your next project with fixed electric heat, you now have the tools. You always start with the 100% rule as your baseline. It's the safest bet. But now you also know there's another path, a path to a potentially more efficient design using the exception, as long as you can prove your case to the AHJ. So the big question you have to ask yourself is, does this job fit the rule, or can I make a case for the exception? Knowing that difference is what makes for a truly professional, safe, and code-compliant installation.